They were America's sweethearts, two dazzling stars who lit up the silver screen and charmed the world. But behind the red carpet smiles was a betrayal that rocked Hollywood to its core. When Elizabeth Taylor ran off with Debbie Reynolds' husband, it wasn't just a scandal, it was a war. Friends turned enemies. Headlines exploded, and what started as a private heartbreak became one of Hollywood's most infamous love triangles. But what really happened between these two legends? Why did it spiral into chaos? And how did they ever come back from it? This is the untold truth behind Debbie Reynolds versus Elizabeth Taylor, Hollywood's nastiest love triangle. In the 1950s, Debbie Reynolds and Elizabeth Taylor were the golden girls of Hollywood. They weren't just colleagues, they were close friends. They lived on the same street, vacationed together, and raised their children side by side. Debbie was married to singer Eddie Fisher, and Liz was with producer Mike Todd. The four of them were inseparable. But when tragedy struck and Todd died in a plane crash, everything changed. Debbie stood by Liz in her grief, offering support and comfort. What she didn't expect was that her husband, the man she trusted, would soon fall into Liz's arms. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a blindside. After Mike Todd's death in 1958, Elizabeth Taylor was inconsolable and vulnerable. Eddie Fisher, her best friend's husband, rushed to her side. What began as support quickly turned into something else. Soon, whispers turned into headlines. The affair exploded into the public eye, stunning fans and shaking the image of the perfect Hollywood couple. Debbie Reynolds, blindsided, found out through the press. She was left alone with two young children while the world watched her husband run off with her best friend. Overnight, Liz went from grieving widow to homewrecker. Eddie, once adored, was now seen as spineless. And Debbie? She became America's heartbroken heroine. Debbie Reynolds filed for divorce in 1959, and it was ugly. The media turned it into a circus. Paparazzi swarmed her, reporters camped outside her house, and tabloids devoured every tear-stained quote. Elizabeth and Eddie tried to downplay the affair, but it didn't work. Liz famously quipped, "What do you expect me to do? Sleep alone?" That comment only made things worse. Debbie, meanwhile, held her head high, raising her kids and continuing to work through the pain. She didn't lash out, she didn't break down in public, and that dignity only fueled public sympathy. Liz and Eddie were the villains. Debbie was the victim the world rallied behind. Despite the scandal, Elizabeth Taylor and Eddie Fisher went full speed ahead. They married in 1959 in a quiet Vegas ceremony. Though nothing about it stayed quiet. Hollywood was divided. Friends turned their backs. Studios were furious. Liz's image took a hit, and Fisher's career began to unravel. Their union wasn't built on stability. It was built on ashes. Behind the scenes, cracks appeared fast. Fisher couldn't match Taylor's fame, and she quickly grew bored. Within 5 years, Liz would leave him too, for someone even more scandalous. Richard Burton, the very man she met while still married to Eddie. It was a cycle, and Eddie never recovered. While Liz and Eddie burned bridges, Debbie got to work. She kept performing, kept smiling, kept showing up. She raised Carrie and Todd Fisher on her own, starred in films like The Unsinkable Molly Brown, and earned an Oscar nomination. Her pain became power. The public embraced her not just as a performer, but as a survivor. She didn't need to hit back in the press. Her resilience spoke louder than any quote. Even as the affair defined a tabloid era, Debbie carved a new identity, America's sweetheart with steel beneath the sparkle. She didn't just survive the betrayal, she rose above it. Even years after the affair, the press wouldn't let it go. Liz and Debbie couldn't do an interview without being asked about the triangle. Gossip magazines rehashed every detail. Headlines like Debbie's heartbreak and Liz's shame sold copies for years. The public was obsessed with the drama, and both women were trapped inside it. Even when they moved on, the scandal followed them. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a brand. And for two women who wanted to be known for their talent, it was exhausting. Their feud may have cooled behind the scenes, but in the media, it never ended. Carrie Fisher, Debbie's daughter, grew up in the aftermath of the affair. She once described it as a soap opera I didn't audition for. In later interviews, she reflected on the tension with dry humor, but also acknowledged how deeply it shaped her family. Carrie said the affair made her mother stronger, but also harder. It taught her resilience, but also a certain emotional distance. Carrie maintained a relationship with both her parents, but the shadow of the scandal loomed large. And ironically, Carrie would later develop a close friendship with Elizabeth Taylor, showing that even the most bitter stories can evolve. In 1960, Debbie Reynolds married shoe magnate Harry Carl, who had previously dated Elizabeth Taylor. It wasn't exactly revenge, but it made headlines. The marriage, however, was disastrous. Carl gambled away Debbie's fortune, left her in massive debt, and caused her years of emotional strain. Debbie later said that despite all she'd been through, marrying Carl was the biggest mistake of her life. In a way, it mirrored Liz and Eddie's doomed romance. Two women with wildly different personalities, falling for some of the same self-destructive men. The triangle may have ended, but the echoes kept repeating. In 1966, Debbie and Elizabeth were booked on the same cruise by accident. They hadn't spoken in years. When they crossed paths, Debbie made the first move, sending a note to Liz's room that said, "Let's have dinner and talk this out." Liz accepted. They met, they laughed, they forgave. The feud, once scorched across headlines, ended in silence over a meal at sea. The world never saw that moment, but it happened. In later interviews, both women spoke kindly of each other. Liz called Debbie a class act. Debbie said Liz had been through hell and back. Time didn't erase the past, but it softened it. In the years after their reconciliation, Liz and Debbie truly became friends again. They appeared together on talk shows, joked about the scandal, and even starred in a 2001 TV movie called These Old Broads, written by Carrie Fisher. The script poked fun at their history, and in the end, they laughed at the very thing that once nearly destroyed them. It was Hollywood full circle. They didn't pretend it never happened. They owned it. And in doing so, they took back the narrative on their terms. The Reynolds-Taylor-Fisher triangle wasn't just scandalous. It was historic. It shifted how the public viewed celebrity, privacy, and marriage. Before the affair, stars were protected by studios. After, the gloves came off. The media realized people would devour real-life drama just as much as movie scripts. And suddenly, every star's personal life was fair game. In many ways, this triangle marked the beginning of modern celebrity gossip culture. Debbie and Liz didn't just endure a betrayal. They became symbols of how fame can turn friendship into front-page tragedy. And yet, they rewrote the ending. This wasn't just about a love triangle. It was about love, loss, ego, and forgiveness. About two women, very different, both brilliant, caught in the firestorm of fame. Debbie Reynolds lost a husband but gained something deeper: strength. Elizabeth Taylor lost a friend but learned the cost of living on her own terms. They were both complicated, both human, and in the end, both resilient. Their feud may have made headlines, but their reconciliation left the bigger mark. In a town that loves drama, they showed what redemption actually looks like. That's the story worth remembering. Debbie Reynolds and Elizabeth Taylor gave us one of Hollywood's most explosive scandals and one of its most unexpected reconciliations. If this story gave you a new perspective on two of the industry's most iconic women, like, comment, and subscribe to Silver Screen Secrets. We bring you the real stories behind the stars, the betrayals, the battles, and the truths they carried long after the headlines faded. Because behind the glamour are legends who lived it all.